Welcome, Bruchim Abayim. I am Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi, and you have found Beit Virtuali. Now, if you just watched my last video a couple days ago, then Kal v'chomer, how much more so are we exhausted from all the holidays? You know what? This is a marathon sometimes, and we have all these holidays in the month of Tishrei that are just clumped together, and they have the deepest truths of our tradition. And what do we do with that? It's like there's so much work to be done. When do we get a release? And the answer is right now, on this day. I'm uploading this right before Shemini Atzeret begins. And the first question should be, what the heck is Shemini Atzeret? Well, I got to say chag sameach, first of all, because Shemini Atzeret is chag. It's one of the mandated holidays in the Torah. And it's the one that, I don't know if it's because it's at the very, very end of all of these Tishrei holidays. I don't know if it's because we're really focusing on Simchat Torah, which, depending on where you are and what stream of Judaism you're in, might be happening on the same day as Shemini Atzeret. But Shemini Atzeret gets completely thrown away. And other than it might have something to do with rain, that's about the end of our engagement with it. This is my third video on a series of Iterative Judaism, meaning we repeat over and over again, but we repeat it in such a way that each time we repeat it, we ask questions that elevate us, that allows us to change, actually make changes in our life. In other words, Judaism not as blind ritual, although the blind ritual can be very important in context, but that blind ritual reaches into something deeper. We are primitive humans. We require external symbols to remind us of internal realities. And so what possibly can a holiday that has maybe something to do with rain, but we don't know anything else about it, how can that help us? Well, if you watched my last two videos, then you'll know that once again, I'm going to make the suggestion that every holiday has a question that goes with the holiday, or even a list of items that we can write down that helps us to analyze a specific problem or a quandary within ourselves, within our living structure. And before we can get to that with Shemini Atzeret, we actually have to look at the symbolism of rain in our tradition. And, well, we come from a desert climate, so to some extent this should be absolutely obvious. Rain is that which we need to live. Rain is life. Of course, we also have the symbol of rain as a destructive power and the flood with Noah. That's actually a slightly different discussion and not for this video. But generally speaking, if the rains come, we survive. If the rains don't come, we don't survive. That's why when you look at the ancient history of the Middle East, you will find rain gods, because that was one of the single most important, if not the single most important factor on would we live or would we die. So this is the holiday that reflects the beginning of, if the rains don't begin to fall now, we're not going to live. Which might just tell us that this holiday is slightly more important than the weight that we give to it. Give another example to show this. If you go through the daily prayers or Shabbat prayers, when you reach the Amidah, in most Sidurim, for the last few months, since Passover, we've been saying Morid Hatal. We've been saying who lets the dew fall to the earth. And on Shemini Atzeret, in the Musaf prayers, we switch that over. There's an incredible, some of those beautiful music ever written in Ashkenazi Judaism, something we call the Birkat HaGeshem, where we switch from Morid Hatal to Shiva Ruach Morid HaGashem, who causes the wind to blow and who causes the rain to fall. And that seems like a very, well, it's a primitive thing. It seems like one of those things that we can just kind of nod and smile. Hey, we're all superior because we know it's not a sun god and a rain god and a wind god who does everything, and we can feel all happy that we've grown up so much from our ancestors. I'm not so sure that that's the case, because first of all, if we look at something only on the surface level, we're missing out on almost all of Judaism. And second of all, don't be so sure that even our ancestors put that in the prayer book for the sake of only survival, as if that was an only. But Judaism has been concerned about the elevation of the soul for a very, very long time. And if you think back to that huge grouping of holidays, up until this moment, up until Shemini Atzeret, they've all taken place during the statement of the dew falling. And if we carry it back, look at the holidays that take place in the dew. The end of Pesach, through to the counting of the Omer, Lag BaOmer, into Shavuot, moving into that incredible time of introspection, of devastation of the 9th of Av, the joy of the 15th of Av, and then slowly climbing our way to the Elul process, the asking the questions about forgiveness and forgiving into the intensity of the high holy days. These are our holidays of doing. From Pesach, we had a question. I'll do the video on that one. Shavuot, there's a primary question. For 9th of Av, there's a primary question. For the 15th of Av, there's a primary question. The obvious questions are the ones we're used to relating to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But that's all under the do. And don't think that that's accidental, because what happens as soon as we start saying rain? Well, we've got Simchat Torah, which is awesome. We get to celebrate the completion of the yearly cycle. And then we have Hanukkah. And then we have Tu B'Shvat, the holiday of the victory over the winter so life can begin again. Purim. And then finally, the beginning of Passover. So we've got holidays that all have the commonality of overcoming adversity. Now notice not only the intensity of the amount of holidays under the dew versus the sparsity of the holidays under the rain, but look at how it matches up with the symbolism. In the dew, we've got work to do, as it were, pun slightly intended. We're harvesting. Don't forget, each of the pilgrimage festivals, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, they're harvest festivals. We would go out into the fields and work and then bring our first fruits to the temple. We've got the work to do in the 9th of Av to mourn. It's our obligation. We've got the work to celebrate partnership in the 15th of Av. And yes, it's a much more important holiday than we give it credit for historically and how we can use it today. And then, of course, we've got the central of how to function in a society and in a relationship, saying, I am sorry. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Elul moving up to it. They are the holidays of doing. And we're about to, as Shemini Atzeret, move into the holidays of being. And if you want to look at this from a very external anthropomorphic God standpoint, rain is that which is done from above to us. Do is passive. So while God is passive, we are doing. And when we finish with the act of doing, then the eternal begins once again to prepare the ground for us to do more work. At the most basic level, I'm not going to eat grains this year that were harvested 20 years ago. Yet how many of us are using tools right now, apropos my last video, that worked 20 years ago? Meaning we're preparing the earth for our harvest next year. So that brings me to the question, and the clue to the question actually comes from the Torah reading for Shemini Atzeret. Again, we're so used to Shemini Atzeret and Simchas Torah being kind of squished together that we tend to think of the readings right now for being the very end of Deuteronomy and the very beginning of Genesis. But the reading for Shemini Atzeret is not that. The reading for Shemini Atzeret is Deuteronomy 14:22, and it starts off by saying, you shall set aside a 10th part of your harvest. Now, the connection is obvious. Once again, we're dealing with the beginning of the rains preparing for the harvest. But the question is this: if we've just gone through and done all this work, and we're stepping into a time where we need to pay attention, where we need to fill ourselves with information and metaphors and teachings and symbolism, we need to allow ourselves to be inundated with the reminder that we get over and over again. We get it on Hanukkah, we get it on Purim, we get it on Tu B'Shvat, that we are able to overcome anything. You don't believe me? Re-look through those holidays. That's what we're being told. That's not what society's telling us. Society's telling us we can't get over anything. We have to wallow within that pain. Our tradition is saying, no, we must overcome. And that time of overcoming, how do we do it? By learning. Well, what we're going to be getting out of this harvest next year is what we set aside now. How are we preparing the ground? How are we fertilizing it? So the question is, well, right now, here's the list to make for you. What are you reading? What right now are you reading that's efficacious? What are you studying that is spiritual in nature? Not spiritual in 5 easy steps to a happy life. Anyone who's probably reading that book is not going to enjoy this channel at all. But I'm talking about Torah Lishma, studying Torah for its own sake. Who are we reading that teaches good Torah? Not because Torah is going to give us the exact, tell us right now this is how you live, but because it's going to tell us enough about ourselves that we can look in the mirror and say, oh, that's right. How are we engaging in our religious institutions? What kind of adult education or youth education are we participating in? How much are we assuming that we know and we have yet to learn? How many of us believe that we have nothing left to learn about Judaism? Well, I've got to tell you, I know nothing about Judaism and I've studied it for years. This is Shemini Atzeret. It's the holiday of preparing for the rain, preparing that, well, we're the soil, folks. So you're not going to get a good harvest without preparing the soil. I'm right outside my window are people doing work right now, preparing the soil for the wintertime. And it's beautiful because they're fertilizing the soil. Very natural around here, very natural around here. They're working the soil, they're tilling the soil. And when the rains come, that soil is ready for something to happen. If we are not preparing ourselves for the learning process of the rain, then what kind of harvest are we going to have at Passover? When I get to the question that we ask for Passover, we're not going to have any different answer than last year if we have any answer at all. Spiritual advancement, personal advancement, emotional advancement, relational advancement, anything that evolves in our life is based on being prepared to add something more. So that's the question. What are you reading? What are you doing to prepare yourself for being able to learn? What classes are you signing up for? Online, they're all over the place. I'm going to have classes. Become a member of Beit Virtuali. If you don't have enough money to do that, there's super easy ways. You need to be a Patreon to have access to the education, but there's really inexpensive ways to do that. But find someone from whom you can learn. Don't forget, right at the beginning of Pirkei Avot, the chapters of our fathers, it says that as Torah was passed down on Sinai from Moses through Joshua and the elders and the prophets and the men of the great assembly, that when that Torah finally came to the people who really began rabbinical Judaism, that one of the great ones of them said, well, you know, what all this means that we got from Sinai is get yourself a teacher, get yourself someone that you can study with, and through this, your judgments will be gentle and generous. That's a pretty beautiful life, but not if we're not ready to put something into us that is going to help us grow. So, Iterative Judaism, there it is. What are we reading? What are we prepared to learn? How are we preparing ourselves for the next time that we need to do? And that's it. There's not another holiday for a while, so not another one of these specific videos coming up until Hanukkah. Maybe I'll do a Rosh Chodesh one before then. Maybe I'll do a Shabbat one before then. I'm going to do these videos out for various parts of Jewish practice. How we can look at Talis as iterative, how we can look at Tefillin, how we can look at Shabbat candlesticks as iterative. We're going to be looking at all that over the course of time. But in the meantime, thank you for being a part of this channel. Thank you for being a part of my life. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications. I know I say that every time. It actually really does help. The channel can't grow until people outside of my circle start seeing these videos, and that doesn't happen until there's lots of views and likes. So just help this video to get out there, help this channel to grow. Thank you. If you have the ability to do so, please become a Patreon. And if you haven't already seen it, or if it hasn't come out yet, look for the announcement of Adult Education, my class on Kabbalah coming out in October. In the meantime, above all this, remember our tradition is about love your neighbors yourself, love your stranger in your midst as yourself, because we were once strangers ourselves. We have an obligation to others, and that which is reprehensible to you, do not do to anyone else. The short version of that is don't tear down, lift up instead. Choose one way to lift someone else up today, and in the process of doing that, we begin to all be elevated. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
את ישראל עמך אהבת אהבת עולם בית ישראל עמך אהבת תורה ומצוות חוקים משפטים אותנו תורה ומצוות חוקים משפטים